So, what's the purpose of this presentation that you have come to today? Well, I'll tell you what it's not. It's not the life of Paul. It's not the teachings of Paul. It's not the theology of Paul. It's not even dealing with the problems with Paul, although there are plenty. It's not a defense of Paul, although you find that an awful lot. It is for understanding and for insight into Paul's mind and heart, as far as we can get to that through exploring three different slices, kind of cross-sections of Paul's life and experience and environment represented by these three cities, our tale of three cities: Tarsus, Antioch, and Ephesus. Tarsus, Antioch, and Ephesus. Where are they? Well, they're in present-day Turkey. That shouldn't be a surprise to any of you who've been listening so far. Antioch, it's very interesting, is way down here on this little appendix to Turkey. That actually, after World War I, was a part of Syria. And in the 1930s, the people of that province had an election, and they voted to join with Turkey rather than with Syria, which is kind of interesting. They are mostly Syrians. If you go down to visit Antioch, the most common language that you will hear there is Arabic rather than Turkish. But it is a part of Turkey. So Tarsus down here on the coast, Antioch kind of just across this bay from there, and Ephesus way over here on the west coast. Now, let's go to Tarsus. A little bit of background about Tarsus. It had prehistoric foundations. They can trace it back about as far as we can go, and there's probably still settlements there that have not been fully traced. But it sort of came unto its own when Alexander the Great conquered that part of the world and established it as a city. And it came under Greek influence. It was part of the Hellenistic world up until the Roman Empire went around and conquered everything that was part of the Hellenistic world. It's famous because that's the place where Cleopatra and Mark Antony met, which is, of course, a subject of all kinds of movies and such like. That was in 41 BC. That structure there was one of the gates of the walls of the old town, which was called Cleopatra's Gate. And it still is there as kind of a memorial tourist attraction. Actually, the common designation for it is the Gate of the Bitch. I guess they didn't have a terribly high regard for Cleopatra. But so that's part of the context for St. Paul. Now, here's an area that's been excavated right in the center of the town. It was a wealthy port and trading center. If you remember the location of it, it was sort of right there in the area where land trade routes met the ocean. And it had a secluded harbor so that there would be a lot of shipping, a lot of trade going on there. When the Romans took it over, they made it the capital of the province of Cilicia. Now, we talk about Paul of Tarsus. By the way, that is the well of St. Paul, supposedly next to the house of St. Paul, but that's anybody's guess whether either one of those has any kind of authenticity, but again, it does draw tourists. Paul of Tarsus. We usually talk about Paul of Tarsus. He's referred to that way 3 times in the Acts of the Apostles. And once, the last one there, 22 verse 3, he is quoted as saying he was born in Tarsus. Now, Scripture scholars tend to take Luke with a little bit of a grain of salt about some of the details. So the other references say Paul of Tarsus. St. Jerome 300 years later or so, 350 or so, quotes an older tradition twice in two different works that Paul was born in a town called Gishala in Palestine. And that would be analogous to Jesus of Nazareth not being born in Nazareth, but being born in Bethlehem. So Paul of Tarsus could still be born in Gishala. Not many scripture scholars accept that. Jerome Murphy O'Connor, irascible old cuss that he is absolutely adamant that that is true. So I follow Jerome. The two Jeromes. For some reason or other, the markers there got a little bit lost in the translation. But this is Gishala. That little box should be up to the right. This is Gishala. This is Nazareth. About 30 miles distance. So interestingly, it may very well be, I'm not going to say it was, but it may very well be that Paul was born within about 30 miles of where Jesus grew up. And Jerome Murphy O'Connor is fairly certain, again, other scholars are hesitant and dubious about this, but he's fairly certain that Paul was actually older, was born earlier than most common scholarship seems to indicate. And he's got his reasons for that. That he was born about the same time as Jesus. And Jesus, as we know, was born 6 years before Christ. And there, you know that there is a story to that. When they finally started counting the years, which was in the 5th or 6th century, they missed by about 6 years. You know, it's sort of like digging a tunnel that comes out about 6 feet above the road on the other side. Murphy O'Connor believes that Paul's family may have been well-to-do farmers. It was a prosperous region. Now, the reason why he says that Paul was born around 6 before Christ is the Roman armies put down a revolt after Herod the Great died. Herod died in 4 BC. And it was the custom of the Roman army. As we all know today, it's real expensive to fight a war. And somebody's got to pay for it. Sometime, somebody's got to pay for it. They did an interesting thing, how they paid for their wars. If they went into a colony, a Roman colony, and had to put down a revolt, they made the people themselves pay for it. How? By capturing people and selling them into slavery. And of course they would try to capture the good people, not the riffraff, because they'd be more valuable. So it is not unlikely, and there's a it has interesting implications, that Paul's family may well have been captured by the Roman armies in 4 BC. Paul might be about 2 years old, and sold into slavery, bought by a wealthy family in Tarsus, who, not terribly long after that, valued them enough to give them freedom. And sometimes, a very skilled person can be more valuable as an independent contractor than as a slave. Just like independent contractors can be sometimes more valuable than employees, because you don't have to pay them Social Security and all of that. And of course, that's another question for another workshop on social justice and human rights and that sort of thing. But it's very possible that before long, Paul's family achieved freedom. And they were highly skilled and gained Roman citizenship. Remember, Paul was a Roman citizen. How would a Jew in a wealthy city like Tarsus get Roman citizenship?